I want to introduce Cathrine. Cathrine Neilsen-Hewett is there, who is a professor at Wollongong, and where I think some of the most interesting work on assessment is happening with Cathrine and Stephen and others. So the question for Cathrine was, Australia is transforming, as I believe it is, its approach to early learning. How can we ensure that access to early learning, which is one thing, but it delivers improved outcomes for all children and narrows attainment gaps? Can you pass the mic down the line?
I think I might.
Oh, you've got one? Oh, okay.
I believe I might.
Go, okay, sorry.
I mean, that's a really interesting question, because I think our early childhood education system has quite diverse objectives, and I'd say over the last decade, the most significant narrative is really around the role that the system's played in the care of children and the role that the system's played in allowing familial workforce participation. And I think child learning has not always been prioritised in the national narrative. So I'd just like to echo your excitement, Myra, around the shift and the commitment at a national level from both our Victorian and New South Wales governments. And so as we're moving towards the transformation of our system, I think we really need to be thinking very deeply around the decisions that we make and prioritising decisions that are most likely to improve the learning outcomes of young children. And what that means is that we need to be prioritising the needs and the developmental capacities of young children. We need to be prioritising age-appropriate pedagogies. And we also need to be thinking very deeply about making sure that children are in learning environments where they feel safe and they're secure and they're stimulated. Now, Kevin, you spoke to that notion of investment in quality early childhood education and care yields very strong returns. And from a national perspective, we've often talked about it as being a potential equaliser for young children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And indeed, it is a really important lever for lifting children out of learning poverty. We know that the children who are doing least well on our ADC measures and other measures of performance are those children who come from homes that are characterised by low socioeconomic status or have parents who have poor educational histories themselves. We also know that those are the children who stand to benefit the most from a high quality system, but they're also the children who are most vulnerable to a poor quality system. So as we move forward in this transformation, we have to, when we're thinking about going to scale, we have to prioritise those children who are experiencing high levels of vulnerability. So I want you to think, I want to imagine for a moment that you have been tasked with the responsibility of solving an early childhood system jigsaw puzzle. Now, the good thing is that we have all the pieces in front of us. The challenge to you is that we've lost the box. So we don't have an image of what we're trying to create. And what that means for us is we really need to think very deeply about our strategy, and we also need to think very deeply about the process and the order. So anyone who's worked with young children will know that when we teach them how to do a puzzle, we scaffold their approach and we give them a strategy. So we start with our corner pieces and the edge pieces, and then we move towards. So with your pieces, I want you to think about those components that we have, but I want you to think very deeply about the sequence and the order in which you put them down. Because if we don't do it in a particular order, it's going to take us a whole lot longer to solve that puzzle. So I just want to say, I want to start us with 7 pieces that I would like in our puzzle, and we can continue that as we move forward. And I think our first piece is the quality piece, and that's my top corner piece. We can't take things to scale. We can't increase access without prioritising quality. And I think there's real risk for that. And I think we need to think about the principle of do no harm. And we have to be very careful that the decisions that we're making and the policies that we put in place do not increase the risk for some children. My second piece is the workforce piece. We know that a high-functioning early childhood system depends on a high-functioning workforce. And I think we really need to think about what we're putting in place and how we're introducing it. And if we introduce it too early, it's going to flounder without the support of an effective workforce. And when we talk about workforce, that is not only the size of the workforce, but what that workforce looks like. So we have significant heterogeneity in terms of our workforce, and I think we have to be very realistic about our current workforce capacity. And when we're investing in professional learning, we actually need to design processes and support structures that respond to that diversity. And we also need to focus on the affective component. So it's that sense of value, that sense of purpose, and the professional status of our early childhood educators. My next piece is around the need for a stronger marriage and synergy between research and practice. We have to commit to evidence-based practices. You're right, Kevin. The evidence is out there, but it doesn't always translate to practice. And I also really want to argue very strongly for enhancing child development literacy and understanding what that looks like in practice. And in relation to that, my other piece is the under threes piece. We know from the research in Canada in terms of closing the gap, I applaud the focus on the pre-K, but if we don't shift our attention to the birth to three context, we know that we have to start in the first year of life in terms of shifting those outcomes. The other piece is the assessment, so we need to focus on results. Results empower us. I'm going to divide these into two pieces very quickly. One is around measurement, and this is measurement at a systemic level. We need to measure outcomes, but we also need to measure and understand the drivers of those outcomes. And we need to implement quality systems that have feedback loops at a system level, but also at a localised level to support children and families and communities. But we also need to understand children, and I think the most powerful intervention that we have is to understand where children are at and to respond to them and meet them where they're at and take them on that journey. And we need to do that by empowering educators in terms of how we use assessment, and I know we're going to talk a lot about that today. My last two pieces, one is really around how we situate early childhood education within the early childhood development system. Not one system can't do it all, but every system can do something. So it's thinking about how we can link the prior to school to the school context, how we can create stronger synergy and marriage, particularly for vulnerable children, between health and education. And then related to that is the focus on the home learning environment. And that's my last piece, my last edge that I'll add. And really, I think COVID has shone a light on the potential to work with the home learning environment. We know from years of ADC data that we're not shifting outcomes for our lowest quintile of children, and we can't do that in isolation. So I think as we move towards transformation, I think we need to be courageous. We need to think about different models of working. We need to articulate new visions. But I also think we want to hold on to what we've done best in the past and not leave everything behind.